On this episode of the Agile Podcast, we have Jessica Deal, who's a Scrum Master, an Agile Coach, a Change Agent, and the first person on Mars. All right, it's like a real intro. What do you guys think about that?
She got to Mars with a pogo stick. So there you go.
All right.
Impressive.
Jessica, let's talk about, you recently moved from profession in contracting to a profession in being a permanent employee as a Scrum Master.
Oh, right.
Let's talk about that. Like, what's different for you?
Yeah.
Now that you have to live kind of where you, I don't know, do things. I don't know where to go with that.
I got it.
There's the drop off in viewership right here. It happens right here.
Stay with us, guys. This is going to get really interesting. Real soon. Promise.
Yeah, so I want to preface this by saying I'm really grateful for the opportunity of my first Scrum Master role, but it was as a contracted employee, right? I was acting as a consultant and I had zero experience. And they threw me in on a project where I had to pretend like I knew what I was doing, and I didn't. This was the first time I was experiencing it. I probably wouldn't advise someone else to start their Scrum Master career that way. You know, they said it was baptism by fire, so it was pretty tough. But you know, you learn through your failures. So that was a couple years. I learned a lot. But what I'm trying to communicate is I'm now an internal employee at a new company, and I'm finding that I'm much more comfortable in the position of challenging leadership, right? Yeah. Trying to get them to change in certain ways, having them look at more efficient possibilities. And I was scared to have those conversations with clients because I wanted to come from a place of helpfulness and I wanted to keep my job. So did you guys ever experience that feeling?
I'm laughing because I have experienced that feeling, but somewhat kind of the opposite. Meaning that as a consultant, I was perfectly comfortable telling customers or my clients and challenging, their status quo, how they're working. But I've been also a full-time employee, as you are now, in a company, and asking questions there. Oftentimes, they just basically said, "Stay in your lane, bro. Right? You're hired to do this. Just do that." So for me, it was it's interesting because for me, it was the opposite. I struggled more as an internal employee pushing back than I did as a consultant, primarily because as a consultant, they're bringing you in for a reason. You're the expert, right? They clearly don't have the wherewithal to do what they're trying to do. So I use that to my advantage, I guess.
Sure.
Having said that, it probably would have been the same for me if I had no experience and they put me straight in at a client. I probably would have just went, okay, I'm going to try and appease the client and not get fired and do what's right by my company that put me there. So I can understand that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you, Brian? How was your experience with that?
I think kind of the same. I was like, all the client can do is fire me from the client. They can't fire me from my permanent position as a contractor. But I mean, aside from that, aside from my normal incendiary where I would start, from my normal grenade in the room and then running away and closing the door, they're bringing me in because I'm the expert. So why would you bring in an expert and then ignore everything they're or not even ignore? It's what's worse than ignore? Like bringing in an expert and then arguing with everything the expert tells you to do.
Yeah.
Like,
You're wrong.
Why at that point bring in an expert? You don't do that stuff with it's only because it's on my mind because I had some contractors at the house today. Like, there's no way I would bring in a bunch of contractors to do a specialty job at the house and then stand over them over their shoulder every single second and be like, "Oh, why are you doing that? Why are you doing this? Maybe you should do this instead. Oh, maybe you should hold the screwdriver this way." Well, why did you hire them in the first place? I mean, taking wow, I'm on a tangent already. We haven't even been on this topic
Keep going.
5 minutes. We haven't even been on this topic 5 minutes. Do you have so many deficiencies in your personality? That's not a professional thing. That's not professional. I have to take a step back for a second and whatever I'm talking about. I don't even know where I'm going with this. I might edit all this out. Hiring somebody to do a specific job that they are the expert in and then standing over them and questioning everything they do, that is not something I expect of a professional. Let me start with that. So if somebody's doing that and you're a contractor, consultant, whatever term you want to use for it, you really have to stop and take a second and deploy some of those coaching skills. To kind of ask them, hey, is this, you're asking me to do whatever. Let's stay in our actual career field expertise for a second. You're bringing me in to be a Scrum Master, for example. And then you're saying, oh, I'm going to pivot. This is going to be slick. You're going to like this one. You're going to bring me in as Scrum Master, and then you're going to say, God, Jessica, do you really need an hour and a half for a team retrospective? Don't you think you can get that done in 45 minutes? Right? And you look at that person and you're like, well, you've never been a Scrum Master before. You've never even really been a project manager before. You've never been a development team member, QA development, whatever, on a development team. So where does this question come from?
It comes largely from ignorance, in my opinion. Right? They've never, like to your point, they've never done the role before, but they also don't see the value in it, right? And my usual response to that is, okay, fine. We'll do it in a half hour. Just tell them whatever they need to hear. But I'm still going to spend the hour and a half that I need to do it justice. They don't need to know that. But because where they're coming from is the entire team is tied up for an hour and a half when they could be developing stuff.
Yeah.
Right? That's the insecurity that they have. What they don't realize is, they need to look back at how they're working and adjust and improve every single sprint. If they don't do that, then it's not going to get any better.
Right.
So yeah, I just tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah, to me,
Let them go away.
to your first question, where you kind of directed to me, and then I went on a rant. Like the difference between being a contracted employee and a permanent employee, to me, is you have to live with all the people in the organization. You have to live with them forever, theoretically, forever, right? Forever. In those situations, you have to figure out a diplomatic way to kind of steer them back to where they should be. Why are you asking these questions? Like, what outcome are you looking for where you're trying to, tell us we can finish our retrospectives in half the time that I'm setting aside to get the retrospective done? The critique there will usually be, well, we need more hands on keyboards. We need developers to be developing. Like they don't see it as being productive time. That's usually what I have seen when I've dealt with people that tell me to do things like that.
Yeah, as an employee, as opposed to a contractor, though, largely you're operating in an environment where you have responsibility without authority. Pretty much. As a consultant, when you go in, because they brought you in, you can say, I'm here to improve the process. This is what you need to do. So you're authorized to say that, basically.
What do you think about that in your permanent employee role? Do you think that you have the authority to speak as a Scrum Master and to be able to challenge their status quo?
Oh. You know what? When I was even in the interview process, I was asking challenging questions very intentionally to see how they would respond. And I did it to everyone I interviewed with, and I communicated why afterwards, because I wanted to see if they would, take that into consideration.
Yeah.
And they did. And they said that they liked that I came from a place of challenging them.
Yeah.
They wanted someone like that. So that's why I knew this was going to be a good fit for myself. But if they were adverse to that, I would probably run away.
Yeah, right, yeah.
It just wouldn't be a good fit.
So now that you've made it through the interview with your challenging questions in your day-to-day work life, do you feel that they still appreciate and are asking for that? Or do you feel that like that's just putting you on a list and like enough check marks and they're going to just get rid of it? Like, we've had enough.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. So I'm challenging the people above me even and saying, why are we doing it this way? Why is there so many presentation decks? Why can't we just create a dashboard in Jira that would have all of this in there, that would automate this information, that would save all your Scrum Masters a significant amount of time that they could use with the team instead? And I'm asking those questions, and they don't have a good response. Just, this is what we've been doing.
This is the way we've always done it.
Yeah, exactly. Just don't know any better. Yeah. Just put dollars in front of them and say, doing it the way you've always done it is costing this much every single sprint. And this is a waste, right?
Right, yeah.
That will open their eyes, especially if you're talking to people that are higher up. You say, how would you like to save $10,000 every sprint? And sprint on sprint, that adds up, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that might be an angle in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to play with metrics more because I'm having to have those conversations more frequently in this role with leadership. So when I'm trying to persuade them in a direction, I want to be able to show them specific metrics.
Let me ask you a question. Are you exposed to budgeting in any way, shape, or form?
I'm not. Why? Why do you say that?
Because we have a recurring segment on the podcast where we beat budgeting into the grave and then we keep beating it.
Because he won't die. That's why.
just won't. It just won't. We have this idea that teams without economic information, Mike Miller, he actually gave me the exact terminology that I was looking for. Teams without economic information cannot make economic decisions. And when you're choosing what to build and what not to build, if you don't have economic decisions, you can't choose the best economical thing to build because you don't have that information. Right. So you're basically just going to be like, I want the most expensive thing I can have because I deserve it.
Yeah.
Because you don't have economic information.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I thought it was. Yeah.
Are you still involved in budget?
No.
Good for you.
I'm keeping out of it.
I haven't even thought about it since my last client.
unless they, budget teams. If they budget teams, I'd be interested.
Yeah.
But as long as they're budgeting projects, I'm not interested. Because I think that's just the wrong approach. That's a fallacy. Because how well is it working for them, right? Whoever it is, right? They budget a project, and then at the end of the budgeting period, they go, we need more money, right? Because we're not done yet. And that's in the next fiscal year. Or the other problem they have, which is, well, we have this money left over. We have to use it or lose it. So what do? It's like we send all these people to training or something. Just waste it somehow.
Professional.
What a waste, right? So budget teams instead. Just say, here's this dollar amount for this team, and then have empowered product managers and product owners to get the best value possible from those teams. Now I'm interested, right? Until they do that, I'm keeping out of it because it's just a paper exercise at the end of the day.
Yeah, so do you have any good challenges that you've leveled to your team? Anything that's on the edge of getting you fired? Are you getting fired? That's what we're asking, I think.
So I don't think yet, at least yet. I don't know. But the market's really good right now. I'm not super concerned.
So keep making some noise, right? Keep making the noise. That's okay.
Very nice. Very nice.
I wouldn't consider getting fired as getting fired. I would simply consider that as, being displaced for the next opportunity.
Oh, no.
I would say so, too. Yeah.
Viva la resistance.
But realistically, they have had turnover with their Scrum Masters. 5 people have left since I've been there.
5 people?
And I've only been there, a month and a half, maybe.
Yikes.
So, yeah, it's a significant amount. So I say that to say they're really listening to my suggestions. They're taking it in. So what I convinced them to allow me to do for sprint review instead of having a dashboard, because that hasn't been created yet, that's in progress. I just took screen grabs from Jira and put it in a slide deck instead of manually inputting all of this information and telling the story, which took over an hour to create.
What kind of stuff were they asking you to put in? Like the number and the story title and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, like what goals were reached, what percentage of that goal was accomplished.
Sprint metrics, maybe?
Sure, yeah, it was the metrics.
Yeah, I've done that same thing as well as you're doing now. It's just take screen grabs of dashboards and then just put them on a deck and go,
there you go.
Right? Yeah.
You wanted it in a presentation form.
Exactly.
No one complained. Actually, they applauded me for it. They're like, this is way more efficient. We should do this.
So I still wasn't happy with that.
I know.
Right? So the neat thing is I found out this little trick. If I take a screenshot, it's not a screenshot so much as let me just back up. If you take the metrics from your tool of choice, right, whatever ALM tool you have, and create that in Excel, just a table, okay? In Excel, you know how you create charts, right? So use a table in Excel, create the chart, and then embed that chart into a PowerPoint presentation. Now what can happen is, based on those numbers changing in Excel, the PowerPoint presentation will change. So that was pretty cool because I would have it that way. And because I'd do it the day before the review, and then the day off, I find that things have changed. So all I have to do is just punch those numbers in, which is not really me doing manual punch-ins. It's just copy paste from the LM tool. And all you do is just that, literally. It takes a second. And what happens, you watch it. What happens in the PowerPoint deck is it will update and your pie charts will change. And this is cool, right? It takes me a second to portray the right information. So.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Was that an ADO thing? Can Jira do that?
Yeah. It's more a Excel to PowerPoint link. So it just doesn't matter where the data comes from.
Okay.
Right?
I'm not a fan of Jira. Have I mentioned that yet?
Oh, man.
That could be a segment by itself, man.
No, I can't. No, nobody would be interested in watching that. Watching me going Jira for like 20
We're not
minutes.
doing
No,
that.
I can't. No,
Every sprint plan, I'm like, oh, Jira.
I mean, listen,
I think
the roadmap level view is okay.
Yeah,
it's
that's true.
it's better than ADO. Like, it's very difficult to get a cross team snapshot of what's going on
Yeah.
in ADO.
Unless you
Good
use an
point.
extension.
Unless you use an extension,
'Cause I have
or
used an
Aaaaand
extension
or
to do
whatever.
that.
Like, you export everything to Aaaaand and have it in a different tool or whatever.
Well,
like,
you don't even have to export it. You can integrate it. Right?
I know.
But I know what you're saying.
Air quotes integrated,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
somebody can mess with Aaaaand and it reprioritizes stuff and like.
Yeah.
I know, but at least with Jira, the thing with Jira where you can say, well, there's a plugin for that. Like at least that, like, there actually is a plugin, and it's decent at doing what you're looking for, which is building some kind of leadership level percentage done kind of view of what we're working on. Whereas ADO is very difficult to get that. It's very difficult.
Natively it is.
Yeah, natively. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
they have a plugin that's I can't remember, plans. The plans. They have a plans plugin that sort of lets you get that, and you can. That's what I used when I was at a scale level, like at a program level. I used plans to organize. Like, I had swim lanes for teams, and then the features all built up and stuff like that. But it still was not good enough. Like, I basically just like the leadership just needed an high level, epic, percentage done type of deal. You know, but that kind of stuff is much easier to do in Jira, from my experience anyway. You know, I don't know why I've always been in the role of having to be the guy to administer, to figure out how to get that view.
Because you have a technical bent, that's why.
Probably.
Yeah.
That's a QA background we were talking about last podcast,
Yeah.
about like, I know the way to get whatever. Let me prescribe that. Let me write you your prescription. Psh, go get it. But yeah, I don't know. So that was interesting. I mean, we segued like 15 times, but we segued off of, I asked you if you were going to get fired anytime soon because you were challenging the status quo.
I don't think I'm getting fired.
Okay. How have you challenged the status quo where you're at now? Is there a way that you've challenged the status quo where you're at now quickly that's got you attention, or that actually made a significant difference? Like, you were already talking about like what you were doing with your release or your sprint reviews, reviews. And we can each probably go around and talk about like ways you've challenged the status quo.
How have I challenged? Since I've been there, we have a Scrum of Scrum meeting, which isn't even called that. It's like a Scrum sync-up meeting that occurs weekly, just on Monday, where we have to, again, type up a report. So a status update, we have to type it up, put it in the chat. Then we meet in person. Then we just read off what we just typed up.
Use Slack? Is you put in a Slack channel?
No, this is Teams.
Oh, Teams.
Yeah, we have
I
Teams
love
chat.
Teams.
And, you know, that's the extent of it. I guess the purpose is to discuss if there's any cross dependencies, but there's really no good conversations transpiring in this meeting. It's awkward. And like you wrap up. So to me, one, let's have a dashboard for this. You know, like, why are we manually putting this into this chat channel? Two, just for tracking cross-team dependency, it's a mess. And that's something else that we can be utilizing in Jira, I'm sure. I haven't done that yet myself in Jira. Do you have any tips for that?
Not specifically in Jira, but I'm sure there's a plugin.
Do you
for
think there's a
that.
plugin?
Like a digital equivalent of using a red string or something.
All right.
So there's that meeting. Sprint review deck, which is long and tedious and no one's reading it. Core meeting, quarterly meeting, the monthly meeting. It's all these presentation decks. I'm learning it's all the main stakeholders. It's repetitive information. I don't know why so many people have been doing this for so long. And I'm fresh, you know, and I'm asking, who is the audience? What do they need to see? Is this valuable to them?
Yeah.
Is there another way that we can show them this information that's easier for us? So yeah, that's been fun so
Good
far.
for you. I think that's the right angle. And just like I said, you know, add in the dollars and say, just because we've always done it that way, it's costing us this much. Just think about it. How long have you done it that way? Why should we continue bleeding money like this?
All right.
Right? I have a better way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Another thing that I'm learning that they do here is, speaking of contracted employees, as we were talking about earlier, we have this specific vendor of contracted employees, and they want to have them on a team, but they want them in their own individual pod on the team. So on this stand-up board that we look at every day during stand-up, they actually want this vendor team to be after everyone else, to be identified on the board as being this vendor team. So they're separated. And then they have one representative from the vendor group in that pod who attends all the other meetings, but the other ones don't. So their voices, in my opinion, it doesn't seem like they matter. Yeah. It's just the representative. And in addition to that, they want to keep such an eye on this vendor and all the team members from them that we also have to do a leadership weekly meeting, which is very redundant. It's essentially what we do in stand-up, but we pull up what they're working on and where they're falling behind to kind of call them out on it.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Is the vendor team all offshore?
Yes. Well, the representative is not, which is why he shows up to meetings.
Okay. The reason I ask that is because if you're scaling in any way, shape, or form, right, and you have a team offshore, it would be hard for them to attend your stand-ups because of the time difference.
Sure.
In that scenario, it might be valid for them to have their own Scrum, and then somebody from their team would relay messages back and forth from your Scrum and attend yours. That's the only scenario I can think of. Yeah. Certainly there's no excuse for that second meeting where, what are they working on? That's just micromanaging. Basically the organization thinking, are we getting value out of this?
Yeah, right. And again, this meeting came from our Scrum Master lead. So for me to come in fresh saying, why are we doing this? Is this needed? Don't you think this isn't the best use of the team members' time? And him saying we have to do it because leadership needs us to do it. I've been challenged in that way.
Just keep going with the 5 whys. But why?
Yeah, but why?
Right.
Why are you doing that?
I did that when I came in as a team Scrum Master, part of a scale program. And I did that after our coordinated Scrum of Scrums. I was like, I don't get any value out of the Scrum of Scrums. Yeah. I was like, my teams are never blocked. I don't have dependencies on any of these other teams. You had the Scrum Masters and the product owners from every individual team in the program. But then you also had the technical leads of the program who didn't sit on an individual team, but they came to the Scrum of Scrums to have kind of like visibility, to be informed. They're the eye on that RACI matrix, right? Because that was the organization. The organization had just laid Scrum over their PMO type traditional project management in disguise. And after my first week, I told the Scrum of Scrum Masters, I was like, I don't really see a reason why I'm in this. Why I report anything in this Scrum?
Is this valuable?
Yeah, I was like, nothing I report is valuable because I say our teams are on track.
Right.
We'll see you at the sprint review. We're on goal for a sprint, for everything we committed to, and no problems. I'm done in 30 seconds, and I was like, I don't think this is valuable.
Right.
Well,
I brought up the subject of working in an established company, like in a corporate environment, and then a startup environment.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a big difference there. In corporate, they kind of just want you to show up to the meetings and show your face.
Yeah, so I think on that kind of model where you have corporate versus startup, on a startup, people are a lot more flexible. People wear multiple hats, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So this notion of we do this because we've always done it that way probably doesn't exist at a startup. It's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Quite refreshing, in fact. But at the other end of the spectrum, with a startup, they're kind of floundering as well because they are a startup. So they haven't found their groove yet. And if you go in at the very beginning of it and you try and lay down some guidelines, not rules necessarily, but some guidelines, you've got to be open to being flexible with those guidelines, right? As a Scrum Master,
Yeah.
Whether you're an employee or not, it doesn't really matter. You could be a consultant going in there.
Right.
But if I'm setting up guidelines for a startup, I'm thinking to myself, these guys have to figure out the best way for themselves. All I'm doing is just putting these rails in place to make sure they don't fall over the edge, right? But there's a lot of space between the guardrails,
right?
I think that's important.
Yeah,
otherwise they'll just see one way and they'll just keep going down that way.
Yeah, but to take us back to this might have been a previous podcast at this point. Take us back to a previous podcast? ? You're there to encourage experimentation rather than say this is the way we're doing it because this is the way I've seen it done successfully at other places. Because if at a startup, I think the difference between coming into an established, I'm assuming established company in this case means a much larger company. I think startup. I think like less than 50 employees. That's what I think when I think startup.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. If you're coming into a startup and they're bringing you in as a Scrum Master / Agile coach, because the job like the title of the job doesn't really matter at that point. Basically, they're bringing you in as a Scrum Master. That means they're bringing you in as a servant leader, change agent, somebody who's an expert in Scrum, somebody who knows how Kanban works, potentially. You have a lot more ability to flex in the organization to say, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you do whatever? To basically not be contained within your one single team that they brought you in for or whatever. To help the organization by expanding out of just the role they brought you in to help guide and kind of sharing your expertise with the entire organization. Like we talked about this in the previous podcast where we talked about you bring Scrum Masters in your organization. We talked about we didn't label them Scrum Masters. We label them as Agile
practitioners.
Agile practitioners. Yeah, right. Regardless of their expertise or their years of experience, whatever, we decided we were just going to label them Agile practitioners. And then we brought them in and said, well, we can have some, I'm just going to call them Scrum Masters because it's easier for me. We'll have a Scrum Master who's positioned up here at the executive level, who just works with the executive level. Mm-hmm. And maybe they, help with hiring or whatever the individual team Scrum Masters. And then we have individual team Scrum Masters. Maybe we have a middle layer of like a scaled Scrum Master, a Scrum Master or something like that. But the point was we have Agile practitioners at assigned at different levels in the organization. Mm. I go back to like when I was at a startup. That one Scrum Master can find depending on the person's personality, they can find a lot of mobility in the organization. They can arrange mobility for themselves in the organization. They can partner with people in the leadership to kind of put, like we were talking about a leadership Kanban. They can help the leadership team build a leadership Kanban. In my example, I coupled with the CEO to build a leadership Kanban to say your swim lanes are each individual member of the leadership team. Yeah. So you'd have a CEO swim lane, a COO swim lane, a CFO swim lane, whatever, sales,
CTO,
market, CMO, sales. Yeah. Basically each department has a swim lane, and then like what are the initiatives going on that Kanban board, right? How was the organization doing that before I showed up as a Scrum Master / Agile coach / change agent / whatever else I was in that instance? How were they doing that before I showed up? I don't know. I'm just kind of figuring it out, going along, like shooting from the hip with their 6 shooters because they're cowboys,
Pew pew.
Yeah, there's a snake in my boot. They definitely were figuring it out, but the clarity of establishing that, they were using Jira, so it was like super easy for me to say, look, I'll create you a board by itself. Mm-hmm. It'll just track whatever features, epics, whatever it is in Jira, like high level items, 1-sentence descriptions. Try to land X customer, try to migrate whatever, try to do whatever, just little one-liners. They don't need a full-time business analyst writing them acceptance criteria or whatever if it's just high-level Kanbans. Mm-hmm. Now at the team, and I still had teams to work with at the time. So I'm kind of doing both because like helping the leadership team kind of figure out how to be a bit more organized, a bit more efficient. Efficient? Is that the word? Efficient? Helping them be a bit more efficient really didn't take a lot of time. It's just, but I kind of worked my way in there to help them. That wasn't my primary job. My primary job was something else. But as a change agent for the organization, I kind of found my way into that. Now, in that instance, if you were to replace me with someone who actually is like a people person, someone who's very good at connecting with people and helping them understand and had that skill, and they would have shot that team to the next level very quickly. You were talking about challenging the status quo before, and one of the things you brought up was my favorite topic of status reports.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And you were like, status reports, that's a good idea.
Yeah, status reports. Is it necessary? Can't we have a dashboard that would present that information?
Exactly. I agree.
Tell me about a time that you almost got fired because you didn't do status reports.
How long do we have? No.
No.
I've not done a status report in the last goodness knows how long. But I have provided status, right? There's a difference between those two. And the difference fundamentally for me is efficiency. I'm not going to spend an hour polishing up a PowerPoint deck when all someone's going to do is spend 6 seconds on it. It's just not worth it. It's not the best use of the organization's money.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to Jessica's point, a dashboard conveys that information, first of all.
Right.
So you'll invest in creating the dashboard once, and it keeps paying dividends. The other thing is the concurrency of that information, right? You send a status report as an attachment to an email. You don't know when the recipient's going to look at it.
Sure.
A dashboard, it doesn't matter when they look at it. It's current.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I want to challenge you on that, though, because I want to ask a question, which is, if someone's asking for a status report, I'm assuming they're in leadership. That's my assumption, right? That may not be true, but in your case, is it someone in leadership who's asking for a status report?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is.
Okay. Or at least in a supervisory type of capacity.
Right. More so that.
My challenge to that is this concept of outcome over output. So if you're asking for a status report, the usual things that I see in a status report are like velocity or number of work items completed. If you're, hashtag no estimates. I almost didn't want to bring it up, but I did anyway. Which is, why are you looking for that? What does it matter? I feel if you're looking for output metrics in a SaaS report, like you're already way down the wrong path.
absolutely. And it's that illusion of progress, because you're looking
Right.
for that so that you can relay it upstream.
What are your thoughts on carryover work? Right. I know in the corporate environment, they wanted the team to complete 100% of what they committed to, the forecast rather. But that's just not realistic, right? And we don't want to punish them for stretching themselves. What are your thoughts?
Carryover work, meaning the problem with carryover work, just from my experience as a team member, is you start working on something and you discover something you didn't know when you started working on it, and you have to pivot your strategy basically and do something different in order to resolve it, and it carries over to the next sprint. Right? I mean, you carry it over to the next sprint, but I think that stuff all kind of solves itself in the wash. Meaning, if you, we did 40 points this sprint, and then the next sprint we did 42 points, but out of those 42 points, 10 points were carried over from the last sprint. Okay, who cares? We still average 40 points per sprint. What does it matter if carried over or not? On one hand. On the other hand, I could see at a team level why you would want to track how much carryover you have, because maybe that's an indication of another problem happening. Maybe you guys are overcommitting or whatever. As a Scrum Master, I could see. Let's talk about it in retro. Why does 25% of our velocity metric every sprint carry over from the previous sprint? What can we do to knock that down? But I would keep that metric, and I would not show it to anyone outside the team. That's kind of where I would, my little note on that one.
You absolutely need to track that, right? Because you don't know what the root cause of that is, to your point. Is the team overcommitting? Are the requirements ambiguous?
Do you think a lot of Scrum Masters track that, or do you think they don't?
I think it varies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on the Scrum Master. But I think it should be tracked. Only because you're not necessarily focusing on the team to say, why didn't you finish everything? Because the answer to that is it was never a guarantee, remember? Right? But you should always look at that to identify the root causes and then fix those up. Root causes could be anywhere from overcommitting, requirements being nebulous, or mid-sprint, a production critical item came up that the team was asked to work on. Well, okay. And that's fine. So to your point, don't share that necessarily because you don't have to. If you share it, it could be misconstrued by leadership. They say, well, the team's not being effective. They're not efficient enough. They're only delivering X out of Y. Right. And that's not, strictly speaking, true when you have real reasons you can back it up with. Well, it's because that we worked on a couple of production bugs this sprint. Yeah. Did you want us to do that, or just complete stories and that are in the backlog? But RCA is important here. You need to figure out, do the root cause analysis, figure out what's going on. It could be something insidious, like your backlog keeps changing, or it's not ordered properly. It could be a lot of those things. So as a Scrum Master, you need to figure out what that is and then fix that up. So if you fix it up, then to your point, it comes out in the wash, because soon this team will start, and you should look for that. The team will start developing or finishing more, right? Over time. Over 2 or 3 sprints, you'll find, okay, now that causal factor was fixed. Now they can actually start to hit their groove.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. What do you do what do you guys do? When you have a team and you consistently present what their average velocity is, consistently you guys accomplished 64 points. And they always want to commit to more. They are very confident that they can complete the more, but they never do. It's very consistent theme. It's carryover.
Yeah.
They're always achieving this much.
Yeah.
And even still, they're like, no, we can do it. How do you tell them? Like, let's not. No. You don't want to say no to them.
No, you don't. If you're consistently being asked to take on more by your team, follow the 5% rule. Just say, you're doing 60 points, let's do 5% more. We'll call it a stretch goal. Mm-hmm. If you fail, it's not that far to fall. Mm-hmm. Try it. And if they meet the 5%, great. Keep it the same for a sprint or two and see if they can stay there. If they can stay there and they say, yeah, we can do more, okay, let's do 5% more.
Interesting. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, we need to put on our list. We need to put on our list the presentation that you have. I'm going to cut this out because it's just for me. We need to put on our list the presentation that you had for all of the sprint burn downs and like what they indicate or whatever, because this kind of goes back to it,
Well, the metrics one?
Like we could do a whole podcast about sprint burn downs, what you see in the burn down, and then what actually happened.
Oh, right. What the causes are.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that would be that would be a cool podcast, because I can't think of any content that's like that. That's a real team focused type thing.
There's so many companies that are not making money.
Sure.
Right? Because they're not after that right now. They're after market positioning. They want to be number one in the marketplace.
They are, yeah. And I would tell you.
And they're selling products, by the way.
And I would tell you if
their costs are higher. So we don't care about their costs.
Exactly.
If they're selling products and what they're collecting on those, I want a slice of that.
Yeah. And if I was interviewing with any companies, theoretically, I would tell you that those companies tell me the exact same thing. I would theoretically ask in the interview, is your company profitable? Because I'm real worried about going to another startup company who's in startup mode, who's either in Series A mode, or who's they're a real small company, like 50 people. I don't know if my heart can handle joining another company who's this small. Right. The question I always ask is, is your company profitable on its own, or do you have to keep going back to investors? Right. And if you get one of these Silicon Valley, startup entrepreneurs or whatever, they'll be like, that's the wrong question. Like,
they would say that.
I'll be like, you mean that's the wrong question? That's the wrong question. Yeah. The question is like, are we in a market segment where the investors are willing to pay to have the entire market, to corner the entire market once this company blows up? Like once this company and the niche they're in blows up, like nobody else is in their niche, they'll basically be the verb.
They'll be the king.
Yeah, they'll be the Google of, you go to the internet and you Google something like that. That's what they're looking for. They're looking to take over an entire segment of the market, and they're basically willing to fund that regardless if it loses money every quarter or whatever. Yeah.
That could be very lucrative for you theoretically if you were to join a small organization like that, because you can get in with a slice of ownership.
Yeah, well, that's
so when they blow up, that's when your money goes.
Yeah, well, that was a weird segue. That was
quite a segue.
Guys, I have so many topics I still want to
discuss. You have a lot of topics over there, and
we've been sitting here getting inspired by the conversation.
I know, and we just barely got over talking about. We just barely got over talking about why you shouldn't send status reports, what to do other than sending status reports. And the other thing we just barely got past was the balance of challenging the status quo and not getting fired. I don't think I've ever had a problem challenging the status quo. I know you'll laugh at this, Jessica, because I'm me. Kidding. But I have a weird way of talking to people, which is the same way I'm talking right now, regardless of who it is, which always puts me on the edge of, ooh, am I going to get fired for saying this?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but that's usually an afterthought for me, because I'll just, I usually say it and I'm like, ooh, yikes. The interesting thing to me about this topic is I'm wondering for you if you have a story about challenging the status quo and being worried about being fired. Like I want to go to you on this one, because I'm sure you have something somewhere.
I do. I just got to be careful how I communicate that.
Oh, I like it.
But yeah, definitely have a story or two around that. Challenging the status quo is a good way to put it. Mm-hmm. But telling people that what they're asking you to do is absolutely stupid.
But you wouldn't say those words.
No, you wouldn't say those
Theoretically.
words theoretically, right. No, I think to your point about being worried and kind of balancing getting fired or not, it just depends on how you position that rebuttal, right? If you just say, I think that's stupid, you wouldn't say those words, but if you're just doing it to be obstinate, that would be the wrong thing to do. Rather just say,
sorry.
Oh, Brian.
I might have done that in my younger days. Theoretically, I might have done that in my younger days, right? Looking at a bunch of equipment stacked up and go, oh, yeah, right?
Okay.
But if you're showing a better way, then you shouldn't be afraid of getting fired, right? If you're showing them a better way than what they're asking you to do, then you should have confidence and say, this is the way to go because, right? I'm not just saying, no, I don't want to do it because I don't want to do it, or I think it's stupid. I'm just saying, I get what you're saying, but this is a better way. Tell me how it's not better. Then I don't think you should be afraid of getting fired, because if you do get fired, frankly, you don't belong in that organization.
I think you're right.
You know?
Yeah. Stick to your morals.
And I did not reveal my experience here all that much, but it has happened at a large company. Let's just say that.
One of the topics I have on here is context switching. Ironically.
Do you want to talk about context switching or
No,
team structure?
I was saying, ironically, I wrote down
I
context
love both.
switching.
I love both. We both love
We
both.
do.
Well,
They're awesome
both of those
topics.
and budgeting. Like, any of those.
I also have on here DISC because I want to talk about it. I feel like I have a personal theory right now that I feel like high C personalities are more successful in this environment. Challenge me.
Well, back it up. Why would you have that theory? What makes you say that?
Well, for me, what I've seen from high C personalities, obviously they're conscientious, compliant, they're precise, and they're exact. And they're pretty consistent from what I see as well. And I feel like that predictability and that, them being so concise where leadership can trust that they're going to deliver and what they're going to deliver, that's preferred in that environment.
Interesting.
What do you think?
For me, those traits ring true for somebody like a project manager, because there's predictability with a project manager. They're going to give you exactly the same things over and over and over.
Yeah.
The process, they're going to follow the same process, right? A Scrum Master is going to adapt the process based on findings. That's why we have retrospectives, right? And so for me, the C personality is more likely to be a project manager rather than a Scrum Master.
Interesting.
Now, I will say that the D personality is definitely a project manager, right? Because they are used to getting their way. They're used to setting down the rule by themselves and say, you do this way, right? Not, how do you think this might work? They don't do that. So D is definitely there, but I think C can be trusted by leadership because they're giving them all the right things every time, right? They're going to those phase gate meetings with all the right decks and everything else. A Scrum Master might question the value of doing those decks, or might even change up the format. They may even value the entire event and say, why? Let's just turn it on its head. Instead of having phase gates, let's just slice it down to a minimum viable deliverable, right? And there's your phase. So they may do that, but a project manager is not going to do that because they're just so in tune with this idea that you can only do so much before you can do more. And when you do that much, you have to justify your performance in order to get the blessing of the higher ups so that you can do the next chunk and the next chunk. But that's just, my interpretation of it.
Interesting. Okay. What do you think?
I think Om is spot on with that. Like, I don't really have anything else to add. I don't know. What's the difference between the S and the C? Like, the S is like structure and the C is conscientiousness? Conformity?
S is steady. So S are the very friendly people. They like others. They're warm. They're a good team member. C's don't really care about other people. They want... Yeah, I mean, that's what
Sign
it
me
says,
up.
right? They don't really care. They don't care if they like someone. They care if they can deliver. Yeah.
I apparently don't know anything about this.
I think you just summarized the project manager. They don't care about anyone. They just want to be able to deliver, right? Through their teams. They don't care if people have personal issues or whatever else. Generally speaking, I'm saying, right? And say, yeah, but we have a deadline. I don't care what it takes. Get it done. And then they'll be on you. Is it done yet? Is it done yet? That's a PM.
Yeah, and maybe that's why I have the mentality right now that I feel like leadership appreciates that mentality and personality more so. And it's because they're easy to manage and there's that predictability there.
Huh. I think S's are more likely to be more compliant because they don't want to upset the apple cart. So they're going to just yield, basically.
Yeah.
As opposed to, we were talking about challenging the status quo. They're less likely to do that. They're more likely to fall in line and say, oh yeah, that's what we do. That's what I'm asked to do by my leadership, so I'm going to do it.
So which one do you think is most likely to challenge the status quo?
I don't think there's a black and white answer to that.
I know.
Well, I'm unclear only because I'm thinking into this way too deep. So the C is the system and the S is the people?
That sounds about right.
Oh, is that similar? Is that close? I don't know what I'm...
You're close, definitely.
Because there's a podcast topic that I'd like to go into, but that I'm not going to. I'm going to grab the wheel and turn the car until we spin out and don't go anywhere, because I want to talk about building and breaking systems rather than people and individuals and job roles and stuff like that. Because I think that a majority, like a big thing that Agilists, specifically Agilists, deal with is systems that have gone out of control. And systems that have basically taken over, and that people don't realize that the system is taken over. And I want to talk about that. Although I want to get the venue and I want to get the discussion points exactly right to talk about. How do you build a good system? How do you, when you come into a company, start realizing where the system is taken over and everyone's just kind of like, oh, that's the way we've always done things. That's just the way it's done here. You have to submit a status report by Friday in this system or whatever, because that, otherwise you'll get in trouble with leadership. At that point, the system has taken over. Nobody really cares about it. A perfect example is a project I was on. They were like, you have to submit a status report on Friday by, I don't remember, 3 p.m., 4 p.m. I don't remember when it was. And all the status reports went into some kind of central, it wasn't Excel or anything like that. It was like a actual real system.
Project server by chance?
Something like that. Like that. And you had to submit the report by a certain date or whatever. And I was like, who reads these things? And I went super deep in the organization to figure out who owned that back end system and who accessed it and who actually read them. So if we all had to submit the reports by 4 p.m. on Friday, who in the company at 4:30 on Friday went in and read all their, or consolidated all the reports, or looked at a dashboard built on all the reports?
Let me guess, nobody. Absolutely.
Nobody. And I was like, I refused to do it. After I went down that rabbit hole and discovered that, I never did it anymore. And that kind of brings us back to our initial point of challenging the status quo. I have a terrible way of challenging the status quo where I just refuse. Like, I just stamp my little feet and I just refuse to do it. Because I'm the type of person where I will put in time to investigate. I'll track the leads down and follow them where they go to figure out, well, who looks at these reports? What dashboard do these reports populate? Who sees these percentages? And when I figure out that nobody really does, I won't do them. I'll opt out. And honestly, like to my detriment, like, I've gotten in trouble for doing that just because I'm the one nail sticking out, not doing the bureaucratic process that nobody sees value or takes value from anymore. But I've never been afraid to be the person to be like, I'm not doing this. This is I'm not getting any value from it.
Yeah.
I know you're not. Because maybe it's because early in my career I was a business analyst for a long time, right? Maybe it was because of that, where I'm like, if I dig in and I find that nobody values what the system is doing, I'm not going to contribute to the system just for the purpose of contributing to the system. Because basically the answer in that case is everyone's doing it because that's the way that everyone does it.
Yeah, I think you're right to question the process in terms of value, right? But I think the other side of the equation there is also, it's one thing to say you're not going to do it, right? Because it has no value. You know that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right? So you need to communicate that, I think, to the stakeholders, the recipients of those
Right.
artifacts, and
Yeah.
say, there's no value in this, and here's why.
Mhm.
And by the way, the information you're looking for can also be obtained in this other way.
Mhm.
So as long as you follow through and show them some alternate
Right.
method,
Mhm.
right, then you should have full confidence that what you're doing is right. And even if they don't want to hear it, you should still say it. And if they say, do this or else, then just say, okay, I'll find myself, that revolving door, because
Yeah.
next person's going to do the same thing over time, right? Not
Yeah.
everyone's compliant.
Well, I like that because it comes back to the
Interesting.
Scrum Master on the edge of being fired. Like a Scrum Master skirting the edge of, I'm going to challenge this organizational whatever staple, and will it get me fired or not? But I mean, if the Scrum Master's not going to do it, who's gonna be the one to challenge it? The development team, like the individual developers on the team. Rarely on teams that I have been on have the developers been the ones to say, we're going to challenge the organizational anchors or whatever. Like usually it's not. Yeah, you're right. Like I see you nodding.
Yeah, it's not them.
Usually it's not the developers. They're just look, I'll do what I can do. I'm not going to rock the boat.
Right.
I got this.
They just want to code, basically.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Leave me alone. I'm
Yeah.
going to code.
Yeah, I don't blame them. That sounds nice sometimes, doesn't it?
If we're going to get real stereotypical, I could easily see the developers being the introverts and the Scrum Master being the extrovert on the team.
Mm-hmm.
To say like the developers are kind of going to just eat that issue and just kind of consume it and go away, and the team Scrum Master being the extrovert saying, well, I'll be the one to kind of bring it up and hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And kind of challenge it and see what happens from it. And maybe they're not challenging it in a way where they're forcing the issue, but they're at least elevating it to say, hey, what do you think about this? We've seen this. What do you think about it? Whereas maybe an introvert wouldn't go out to make themselves uncomfortable to be the first one to bring it up.
Yeah, this is fun. And that's why I kept going back to, I feel like corporations prefer compliant personalities because you can easily control them.
Sure, they fit in. They're pawns.
Fit in. They're pawns, exactly.
Oh no, we've gone back to control. Like it's almost as if you're gonna,
Dude, it's a vortex,
gonna-
right? It keeps sucking us
you're
back
gonna-
in there every time.
You're gonna
Control?
yell at me for this one. It's almost as if there's a class of people to do the work and a class of people to manage them. It's almost as if there's a person named Taylor.
That's Mr. Taylor. I was going to say that.
Mr. Taylor, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We've hit on Taylorism again, and this is the time to end the podcast. Now that when we land on Taylorism,
We've hit rock bottom, my friend.
we're done. Like
I don't know where this
I'm
went.
so excited.
I still want to talk about context switching.
It's called scientific
We've
management.
been doing that.
I know. It's still writing it.
I shall beat it in the French accent. My French accent is terrible, by the way.
I think it's pretty good.
It's the idea that there's a management class and there's a worker class.
Oh, okay.
The idea that the management class knows the best way to do all the work. The worker class, also known as a labor class, is only good for moving heavy objects.
Right.
Like they don't know how to do anything.
They're just worker bees and not
Yeah.
thought people, right? They don't
They're
think.
not thought people.
Yeah.
Like that
They should just be told what to do.
Yeah. Usually when we hit Taylorism, like that's how you know we're done for the day.
It kind of is the low point of our
Yeah,
podcast.
Yeah. So
You know, that is interesting though, because I've had developers who refer to themselves in big corporations as simply just pawns. And that's how they feel, right? They're just
Sure.
pawns.
It's a shame.
It is.
People feel that way.
Yeah.
This should be they're knowledge workers, right? We're all knowledge workers. And so they should be creative in their work rather than just be told what to do, right? And we go back to the throes of project management where the project manager hands out what are called work breakdown packages to people. So the project manager says, developer A, here's your work breakdown, right? This is what you're going to work on. And you're going to work on it exactly as it's laid out. Do this by this date, do this by this date, etc. In that scenario, and that's still prevalent today, of course, very widely, right? So in that scenario, the project manager is exhibiting Taylorism because they've never done the work. So how do they know? Right? How do they know how long it's going to take?
Because they are enlightened.
They are. Yeah, do as I say. Exactly.
Oh, I like it. I like it. Well,
I think we should stop here, no?
Well, Taylorism indicates the end of the podcast. Well, thank you for being here. Jessica, thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
If you like Taylorism, like and subscribe.
Even if you don't like Taylorism, like and subscribe.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're much better. If you don't like Taylorism, like and subscribe.
Okay.
I feel like the two people enjoy our discussion of Taylorism.
Thank you for staying with us, the two people that are still watching.
All right. Well,
are we live right now? What's happening?
No, we're never live. I haven't been.
Thank you to our two viewers who've hung tight.
We aspire to be live one day, but not yet.
Any parting words? Taylorism.
The moral of this podcast episode is, to me, be a disruptor, But don't be scared to stick to your morals and your guns and see what happens. Because if you get fired, like Ohm's point, you just weren't meant to be there.
That's right.
It's just a redirection.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
I don't know. I don't know.
Why? You seemed upset.
I was upset by the sticky that I was writing. You said Microsoft Teams, and my mind went into a rage. I was like, oh god, Microsoft Teams. I'm so this is nothing to do with what we're talking about. This is like wildly where my mind goes when these conversations happen sometimes. Microsoft Teams. I was like, let me think of all the applications that are better than Microsoft Teams.
It's a sassy head bob for me. I just get excited when I see it.
Google Hangouts, massively better than Teams. Like, you can just start a Hangout and then just boom, done. Zoom, you can just copy the code and start your Zoom and paste the code in and join it. Like Microsoft Teams, you actually have to click the link. There's nothing to paste anything into. Zoom. Tin cans with a string between, better than Microsoft Teams. BBS forums in the 90s, better than Microsoft Teams.
I love BBS forums.
Yeah.
I'm going to take us off that topic.
AOL Instant Messenger from 1997, better than Microsoft Teams.
No, or